We're number one. Welcome to the third hour of our program. Yes, indeed, my friends, we are number one. The U.S. broke the record, and the year is not even out yet. I mean, it's just the first week of December, and we have broken the record for all time, the largest number of people killed in mass shootings in any country, any developed country anyway, anywhere in the world ever, including the United States. We broke our own record. We broke everybody else's record. It's the highest number of mass shootings in any year. According to the Gun Violence Archive, its tally for the year is 630 mass shootings. 630. We are literally the only nation on earth who traumatizes its children in public schools by requiring them to go through active shooter drills. And I can tell you, it produces trauma. And it will be a lifelong trauma. I mean, they have gotten real serious about this. They play these things out. They enact them, you know, run and hide and be. You know, when I was a kid, back when I was a kid in the 1950s, going to elementary school, we had duck and cover, and we took it as a joke, as did our teachers. I mean, you know, the bell would ring, and we'd all jump underneath our desk and put our fingers over our eyes and our thumbs over our ears, so that when the bomb goes off, we wouldn't become deaf and blind. We'd simply lose all our skin and be turned into a mass of molten flesh. But at least we were protected, right? I mean, we all knew it was silly. I don't know anybody who was traumatized by duck and cover, frankly. But, you know, I've got grandkids in school right now, and I can tell you, these kids they're frightened. With good reason. Because they see these shootings on television all the time. And you know, in the back of the 50s, I never saw, you know, America being blown up with a nuclear bomb. I mean, the whole duck and cover thing was conceptual. It wasn't real. It didn't feel real. It still doesn't. But, you know, Uvalde, I mean, a guy walking into your school and shooting people up and walking around for an hour while the police are standing around twiddling their thumbs in terror because the bad guy has, you know, more armaments than they do, or is, you know, more well prepared for whatever. It's just only in America. And why? Because the gun manufacturers decided that they were going to buy themselves a political party. This all started in the 1970s. 1973 or 74 was the year that the National Rifle Association made the transition from being a sportsman's club to being an advocacy arm of the weapons industry. And by, you know, I don't think any coincidence, you know, 1976 was the year the Buckley versus Vallejo decision by the Supreme Court, in which they said that giving money, you know, rich people giving money to politicians is no longer considered bribery. It's now considered free speech. And then 2 years later, 1978, in the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision, a decision that included the National Rifle Association. I mean, they weren't explicitly a part of the lawsuit, but, you know, they were a corporation. That corporations had rights under the Constitution as persons. They had rights under the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, what we call the Bill of Rights. And that included the First Amendment's right to free speech. And the Supreme Court ruled that free speech and money are the same thing, that money is not a separate thing. Now, I've never heard you know, I've got a couple bucks in my pocket. I've never heard them yelling at me or talking to me or anything. And if they ever did start to, I'd start to be a little concerned. But according to 5 corrupt Republicans on the U.S. Supreme Court, and Clarence Thomas was the deciding vote, and this was all after he had been well massaged by Harlan Crow and other right-wing billionaires. In 2010, in Citizens United, Clarence Thomas said, yeah, we're going to double down on this. We're going to throw out over 100 other federal and state laws that are designed to maintain good government and keep big money out of politics. And we're just going to turn the country over to the richest interests. Whoever wants to give our politicians the most money, our politicians will dance to their tune. And that's why you will not find a Republican who is willing to talk about climate change, because they're all being paid off by the fossil fuel industry. You will not find a Republican who is willing to talk about gun violence in the United States, because they're all being paid off by the NRA and the weapons industry. Or in both cases, if they're not being paid off in a big way, they're terrified that a a primary challenge can be brought against them, and they'll be kicked out. In fact, Newt Gingrich just doubled down on this. You know, I saw a promo the other day on MSNBC for Steve Kornacki's got a new show, and he's interviewing Newt Gingrich. I'm thinking, you know, really? I mean, I wouldn't interview Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich is scum. He was arguably the worst Speaker of the House certainly in my lifetime. He was the guy who started the whole thing of shutting the government down. They do this promo. America's never been so divided. Well, it was you, Newt, who did this. Anyhow, setting aside that rant, Newt went on Fox News this week, and he was asked about Mike Johnson. This was on Fox and Friends. And he was asked about Mike Johnson helping to get the necessary votes to start an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden. Now, keep in mind, the only evidence they have so far that Joe Biden has done anything worthy of impeachment is that his son repaid 3 $1,800 monthly loans that Joe gave to him to pay for his new truck, his Ford Rebel or whatever it was, and the $200,000 check that Jim Biden, Joe's brother, had given to Joe, which was the payback of a loan that Joe had loaned him a couple of years earlier. All of it above board. In fact, James Comer had a $200,000, by weird coincidence, exactly $200,000 transaction with his brother that had to do with, as I recall, their parents dying and settling the family estate and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, they got nothing. They got nothing. So anyhow, on Fox and Friends, they asked Newt, you know, is Mike Johnson going to be able to line up the votes? And what Newt said, and I think this is actually, you know, not to give Newt props, but I think this is actually true. He said, if you're a Republican, do you really want to guarantee a primary opponent by voting against looking into Biden? He noted this doesn't impeach him. This simply gives Congress additional power to force the White House to reveal documents and force people to come forward and testify. But basically the bottom line is that he's saying that the big club that the right-wing billionaires and the fossil fuel industry and the weapons industry and now, you know, the Trump industry, the Trump cult, the big weapon that they hold is not so much we're going to give you money or withhold money. It's we will give money to your primary opponent and end your power, which means that every Republican in Congress is literally confronted with a choice, whether it's climate change, whether it's the leading cause of death in America among our children being bullets, whether it's whether or not to impeach Joe Biden for loaning his son $3,000 to buy a car, whatever it may be, every Republican in Congress, the House and Senate, is faced with this choice. Do I do what's best for the country, or do I do what will keep me in power for one more election cycle? And it sure seems to me that almost without exception, they're making that latter choice. They're saying, you know, I'm afraid of a primary, and I'll do whatever it takes to get through the next election cycle, even if that means lying to people.